The new God of Perfectology. The new gods of Perfectology. The new God of Perfectology. The new goddess of Perfectology. The new goddesses of Perfectology. The new goddess of Perfectology. The old God of Perfectology. The old gods of Perfectology. The old God of Perfectology. The old goddess of Perfectology. The old goddesses of Perfectology. The old goddess of Perfectology. The greater God of Perfectology. The greater gods of Perfectology. The greater God of Perfectology. The greater goddess of Perfectology. The greater goddesses of Perfectology. The greater goddess of Perfectology. The lesser God of Perfectology. The lesser gods of Perfectology. The lesser God of Perfectology. The lesser goddess of Perfectology. The lesser goddesses of Perfectology. The lesser goddess of Perfectology. The higher God of Perfectology. The higher gods of Perfectology. The higher God of Perfectology. The higher goddess of Perfectology. The higher goddesses of Perfectology. The higher goddess of Perfectology. The lower God of Perfectology. The lower gods of Perfectology. The lower God of Perfectology. The lower goddess of Perfectology. The lower goddesses of Perfectology. The lower goddess of Perfectology. The greater spirit of Perfectology. The greater spirits of Perfectology. The greater spirit of Perfectology. The lesser spirit of Perfectology. The lesser spirits of Perfectology. The lesser spirit of Perfectology. The higher spirit of Perfectology. The higher spirits of Perfectology. The higher spirit of Perfectology. The lower spirit of Perfectology. The lower spirits of Perfectology. The lower spirit of Perfectology. The major God of Perfectology. The major gods of Perfectology. The major God of Perfectology. The major goddess of Perfectology. The major goddesses of Perfectology. The major goddess of Perfectology. The minor God of Perfectology. The minor gods of Perfectology. The minor God of Perfectology. The minor goddess of Perfectology. The minor goddesses of Perfectology. The minor goddess of Perfectology. The superior God of Perfectology. The superior gods of Perfectology. The superior God of Perfectology. The superior goddess of Perfectology. The superior goddesses of Perfectology. The superior goddess of Perfectology. The inferior God of Perfectology. The inferior gods of Perfectology. The inferior God of Perfectology. The inferior goddess of Perfectology. The inferior goddesses of Perfectology. The inferior goddess of Perfectology. The ancestor God of Perfectology. The ancestor gods of Perfectology. The ancestor God of Perfectology. The ancestor goddess of Perfectology. The ancestor goddesses of Perfectology. The ancestor goddess of Perfectology. The ascendant God of Perfectology. The ascendant gods of Perfectology. The ascendant God of Perfectology. The ascendant goddess of Perfectology. The ascendant goddesses of Perfectology. The ascendant goddess of Perfectology. The descendant God of Perfectology. The descendant gods of Perfectology. The descendant God of Perfectology. The descendant goddess of Perfectology. The descendant goddesses of Perfectology. The descendant goddess of Perfectology. The transcendent God of Perfectology. The transcendent gods of Perfectology. The transcendent God of Perfectology. The transcendent goddess of Perfectology. The transcendent goddesses of Perfectology. The transcendent goddess of Perfectology. The past God of Perfectology. The past gods of Perfectology. The past God of Perfectology. The past goddess of Perfectology. The past goddesses of Perfectology. The past goddess of Perfectology. The present God of Perfectology. The present gods of Perfectology. The present God of Perfectology. The present goddess of Perfectology. The present goddesses of Perfectology. The present goddess of Perfectology. The future God of Perfectology. The future gods of Perfectology. The future God of Perfectology. The future goddess of Perfectology. The future goddesses of Perfectology. The future goddess of Perfectology. The authentic God of Perfectology. The authentic gods of Perfectology. The authentic God of Perfectology. The authentic goddess of Perfectology. The authentic goddesses of Perfectology. The authentic goddess of Perfectology. The synthetic god of Perfectology. The synthetic gods of Perfectology. The synthetic god of Perfectology. The synthetic goddess of Perfectology. The synthetic goddesses of Perfectology. The synthetic goddess of Perfectology. The progressive god of Perfectology. The progressive gods of Perfectology. The progressive god of Perfectology. The progressive goddess of Perfectology. The progressive goddesses of Perfectology. The progressive goddess of Perfectology. The regressive god of Perfectology. The regressive gods of Perfectology. The regressive god of Perfectology. The regressive goddess of Perfectology. The regressive goddesses of Perfectology. The regressive goddess of Perfectology. The ordinary god of Perfectology. The ordinary gods of Perfectology. The ordinary god of Perfectology. The ordinary goddess of Perfectology. The ordinary goddesses of Perfectology. The ordinary goddess of Perfectology. The extraordinary god of Perfectology. The extraordinary gods of Perfectology. The extraordinary god of Perfectology. The extraordinary goddess of Perfectology. The extraordinary goddesses of Perfectology. The extraordinary goddess of Perfectology. The static god of Perfectology. The static gods of Perfectology. The static god of Perfectology. The static goddess of Perfectology. The static goddesses of Perfectology. The static goddess of Perfectology. The dynamic god of Perfectology. The dynamic gods of Perfectology. The dynamic god of Perfectology. The dynamic goddess of Perfectology. The dynamic goddesses of Perfectology. The dynamic goddess of Perfectology. The land god of Perfectology. The land gods of Perfectology. The land god of Perfectology. The land goddess of Perfectology. The land goddesses of Perfectology. The land goddess of Perfectology. The sea god of Perfectology. The sea gods of Perfectology. The sea god of Perfectology. The sea goddess of Perfectology. The sea goddesses of Perfectology. The sea goddess of Perfectology. The sky god of Perfectology. The sky gods of Perfectology. The sky god of Perfectology. The sky goddess of Perfectology. The sky goddesses of Perfectology. The sky goddess of Perfectology. The god of Perfectology. The gods of Perfectology. The god of Perfectology. The goddess of Perfectology. The goddesses of Perfectology. The goddess of Perfectology. The half god of Perfectology. The half gods of Perfectology. The half god of Perfectology. The half goddess of Perfectology. The half goddesses of Perfectology. The half goddess of Perfectology. The vessel of Perfectology. The vessels of Perfectology. The vessel of Perfectology. The name of Perfectology. The names of Perfectology. The name of Perfectology. The person of Perfectology. The persons of Perfectology. The person of Perfectology. The persona of Perfectology. The personas of Perfectology. The persona of Perfectology. The personage of Perfectology. The personages of Perfectology. The personage of Perfectology. The personality of Perfectology. The personalities of Perfectology. The personality of Perfectology. The personification of Perfectology. The personifications of Perfectology. The personification of Perfectology. The image of Perfectology. The images of Perfectology. The image of Perfectology. The imagination of Perfectology. The imaginations of Perfectology. The imagination of Perfectology. The belief of Perfectology. The beliefs of Perfectology. The belief of Perfectology. The thought of Perfectology. The thoughts of Perfectology. The thought of Perfectology. The word of Perfectology. The words of Perfectology. The word of Perfectology. The action of Perfectology. The actions of Perfectology. The action of Perfectology. The reaction of Perfectology. The reactions of Perfectology. The reaction of Perfectology. The feeling of Perfectology. The feelings of Perfectology. The feeling of Perfectology. The situation of Perfectology. The situations of Perfectology. The situation of Perfectology. The circumstance of Perfectology. The circumstances of perfectology. The circumstance of perfectology. The environment of perfectology. The environments of perfectology. The environment of perfectology. The relationship of perfectology. The relationships of perfectology. The relationship of perfectology. The number of perfectology. The numbers of perfectology. The number of perfectology. The formula of perfectology. The formulas of perfectology. The formula of perfectology. The equation of perfectology. The equations of perfectology. The equation of perfectology. The theory of perfectology. The theories of perfectology. The theory of perfectology. The symbol of perfectology. The symbols of perfectology. The symbol of perfectology. The color of perfectology. The colors of perfectology. The color of perfectology. The thing of perfectology. The things of perfectology. The thing of perfectology. The way of perfectology. The ways of perfectology. The way of perfectology. The place of perfectology. The places of perfectology. The place of perfectology. The time of perfectology. The times of perfectology. The time of perfectology. The event of perfectology. The events of perfectology. The event of perfectology. The result of perfectology. The results of perfectology. The result of perfectology. The crown of perfectology. The crowns of perfectology. The crown of perfectology. The throne of perfectology. The thrones of perfectology. The throne of perfectology. The perfectology king. The perfectology kings. The perfectology kingdom. The perfectology kingdoms. The perfectology king subject. The perfectology king subjects. The perfectology king's dominion. The perfectology king's dominions. The kingdom of perfectology. The kingdoms of perfectology. The kingdom of perfectology. The perfectology queen. The perfectology queens. The perfectology queendom. The perfectology queendoms. The perfectology queen subject. The perfectology queen subjects. The perfectology queen's dominion. The perfectology queen's dominions. The queendom of perfectology. The queendoms of perfectology. The queendom of perfectology. The perfectology prince. The perfectology princes. The perfectology princedom. The perfectology princedoms. The perfectology prince's subject. The perfectology prince's subjects. The perfectology prince's dominion. The perfectology prince's dominions. The princedom of perfectology. The princedoms of perfectology. The princedom of perfectology. The perfectology princess. The perfectology princesses. The perfectology princessdom. The perfectology princessdoms. The perfectology princess's subject. The perfectology princess's subjects. The perfectology princess's dominion. The perfectology princess's dominions. The princessdom of perfectology. The princessdoms of perfectology. The princessdom of perfectology. The lord of perfectology. The lords of perfectology. The lord of perfectology. The lordess of perfectology. The lordesses of perfectology. The lordess of perfectology. The priest of perfectology. The priests of perfectology. The priest of perfectology. The priestess of perfectology. The priestesses of perfectology. The priestess of perfectology. The ritual of perfectology. The rituals of perfectology. The ritual of perfectology. The shrine of perfectology. The shrines of perfectology. The shrine of perfectology. The temple of perfectology. The temples of perfectology. The temple of perfectology. The leader of perfectology. The leaders of perfectology. The leader of perfectology. The follower of perfectology. The followers of perfectology. The follower of perfectology. The natural substance of perfectology. The natural substances of perfectology. The natural substance of perfectology. The supernatural substance of perfectology. The supernatural substances of perfectology. The supernatural substance of perfectology. The temporal substance of perfectology. The temporal substances of perfectology. The temporal substance of perfectology. The spiritual substance of perfectology. The spiritual substances of perfectology. The spiritual substance of perfectology. The natural form of perfectology. The natural forms of perfectology. The natural form of perfectology. The supernatural form of perfectology. The supernatural forms of perfectology. The supernatural form of perfectology. The temporal form of perfectology. The temporal forms of perfectology. The temporal form of perfectology. The spiritual form of perfectology. The spiritual forms of perfectology. The spiritual form of perfectology. The age of perfectology. The ages of perfectology. The age of perfectology. The era of perfectology. The eras of perfectology. The era of perfectology. The awakener of perfectology. The awakeners of perfectology. The awakener of perfectology. The awakening of perfectology. The awakenings of perfectology. The awakening of perfectology. The realm of perfectology. The realms of perfectology. The realm of perfectology. The dimension of perfectology. The dimensions of perfectology. The dimension of perfectology. The zone of perfectology. The zones of perfectology. The zone of perfectology. The frequency of perfectology. The frequencies of perfectology. The frequency of perfectology. The century of perfectology. The centuries of perfectology. The century of perfectology. The millennium of perfectology. The millenniums of perfectology. The millennium of perfectology. The purpose of perfectology. The purposes of perfectology. The purpose of perfectology. The meaning of perfectology. The meanings of perfectology. The meaning of perfectology. The culture of perfectology. The cultures of perfectology. The culture of perfectology. The demonstrator of perfectology. The demonstrators of perfectology. The demonstrator of perfectology. The demonstration of perfectology. The demonstrations of perfectology. The demonstration of perfectology. The manifester of perfectology. The manifestors of perfectology. The manifester of perfectology. The manifestation of perfectology. The manifestations of perfectology. The manifestation of perfectology. The presence of perfectology. The presences of perfectology. The presence of perfectology. The glow of perfectology. The glows of perfectology. The glow of perfectology. The goal of perfectology. The goals of perfectology. The goal of perfectology. The plan of perfectology. The plans of perfectology. The plan of perfectology. The book of perfectology. The books of perfectology. The book of perfectology. The philosopher of perfectology. The philosophers of perfectology. The philosopher of perfectology. The philosophy of perfectology. The philosophies of perfectology. The philosophy of perfectology. The releaser of perfectology. The releasers of perfectology. The releaser of perfectology. The release of perfectology. The releases of perfectology. The release of perfectology. The variable of perfectology. The variables of perfectology. The variable of perfectology. The cause of perfectology. The causes of perfectology. The cause of perfectology. The effect of perfectology. The effects of perfectology. The effect of perfectology. The journey of perfectology. The journeys of perfectology. The journey of perfectology. The emergence of perfectology. The emergences of perfectology. The emergence of perfectology. The source of perfectology. The sources of perfectology. The source of perfectology. The originator of perfectology. The originators of perfectology. The originator of perfectology. The origin of perfectology. The origins of perfectology. The origin of perfectology. The forefather of perfectology. The forefathers of perfectology. The forefather of perfectology. The foremother of perfectology. The foremothers of perfectology. The foremother of perfectology. The ancestor of perfectology. The ancestors of perfectology. The ancestor of perfectology. The descendant of perfectology. The descendants of perfectology. The descendant of perfectology. The lineage of perfectology. The lineages of perfectology. The lineage of perfectology. The heritage of perfectology. The heritages of Perfectology. The heritage of Perfectology. The heir of Perfectology. The heirs of Perfectology. The heir of Perfectology. The co-heir of Perfectology. The co-heirs of Perfectology. The co-heir of Perfectology. The joint heir of Perfectology. The joint heirs of Perfectology. The joint heir of Perfectology. The dynasty of Perfectology. The dynasties of Perfectology. The dynasty of Perfectology. The force of Perfectology. The forces of Perfectology. The force of Perfectology. The law of Perfectology. The laws of Perfectology. The law of Perfectology. The pact of Perfectology. The pacts of Perfectology. The pact of Perfectology. The game of Perfectology. The games of Perfectology. The game of Perfectology. The mask of Perfectology. The masks of Perfectology. The mask of Perfectology. The armor of Perfectology. The armors of Perfectology. The armor of Perfectology. The sword of Perfectology. The swords of Perfectology. The sword of Perfectology. The shield of Perfectology. The shields of Perfectology. The shield of Perfectology. The force shield of Perfectology. The force shields of Perfectology. The force shield of Perfectology. The armored force shield of Perfectology. The armored force shields of Perfectology. The armored force shield of Perfectology. The champion of Perfectology. The champions of Perfectology. The champion of Perfectology. The guardian of Perfectology. The guardians of Perfectology. The guardian of Perfectology. The defender of Perfectology. The defenders of Perfectology. The defender of Perfectology. The protector of Perfectology. The protectors of Perfectology. The protector of Perfectology. The chant of Perfectology. The chants of Perfectology. The chant of Perfectology. The shape of Perfectology. The shapes of Perfectology. The shape of Perfectology. The cube of Perfectology. The cubes of Perfectology. The cube of Perfectology. The cuboid of Perfectology. The cuboids of Perfectology. The cuboid of Perfectology. The sphere of Perfectology. The spheres of Perfectology. The sphere of Perfectology. The spheroid of Perfectology. The spheroids of Perfectology. The spheroid of Perfectology. The prism of Perfectology. The prisms of Perfectology. The prism of Perfectology. The pyramid of Perfectology. The pyramids of Perfectology. The pyramid of Perfectology. The cylinder of Perfectology. The cylinders of Perfectology. The cylinder of Perfectology. The cone of Perfectology. The cones of Perfectology. The cone of Perfectology. The triangle of Perfectology. The triangles of Perfectology. The triangle of Perfectology. The circle of Perfectology. The circles of Perfectology. The circle of Perfectology. The semicircle of Perfectology. The semicircles of Perfectology. The semicircle of Perfectology. The square of Perfectology. The squares of Perfectology. The square of Perfectology. The rectangle of Perfectology. The rectangles of Perfectology. The rectangle of Perfectology. The parallelogram of Perfectology. The parallelograms of Perfectology. The parallelogram of Perfectology. The rhombus of Perfectology. The rhombuses of Perfectology. The rhombus of Perfectology. The trapezoid of Perfectology. The trapezoids of Perfectology. The trapezoid of Perfectology. The polygon of Perfectology. The polygons of Perfectology. The polygon of Perfectology. The pentagon of Perfectology. The pentagons of Perfectology. The pentagon of Perfectology. The hexagon of Perfectology. The hexagons of Perfectology. The hexagon of Perfectology. The septagon of Perfectology. The septagons of Perfectology. The septagon of Perfectology. The octagon of Perfectology. The octagons of Perfectology. The octagon of Perfectology. The nonagon of Perfectology. The nonagons of Perfectology. The nonagon of Perfectology. The decagon of Perfectology. The decagons of Perfectology. The decagon of Perfectology. The evolution of Perfectology. The evolutions of Perfectology. The evolution of Perfectology. The revolution of perfectology. The revolutions of perfectology. The revolution of perfectology. The elemental art of perfectology. The elemental arts of perfectology. The elemental art of perfectology. The elemental science of perfectology. The elemental sciences of perfectology. The elemental science of perfectology. The elemental principle of perfectology. The elemental principles of perfectology. The elemental principle of perfectology. The elemental technology of perfectology. The elemental technologies of perfectology. The elemental technology of perfectology. The low elemental art of perfectology. The low elemental arts of perfectology. The low elemental art of perfectology. The low elemental science of perfectology. The low elemental sciences of perfectology. The low elemental science of perfectology. The low elemental principle of perfectology. The low elemental principles of perfectology. The low elemental principle of perfectology. The low elemental technology of perfectology. The low elemental technologies of perfectology. The low elemental technology of perfectology. The high elemental art of perfectology. The high elemental arts of perfectology. The high elemental art of perfectology. The high elemental science of perfectology. The high elemental sciences of perfectology. The high elemental science of perfectology. The high elemental principle of perfectology. The high elemental principles of perfectology. The high elemental principle of perfectology. The high elemental technology of perfectology. The high elemental technologies of perfectology. The high elemental technology of perfectology. The agent of perfectology. The agents of perfectology. The agent of perfectology. The agency of perfectology. The agencies of perfectology. The agency of perfectology. The amplifier of perfectology. The amplifiers of perfectology. The amplifier of perfectology. The amplification of perfectology. The amplifications of perfectology. The amplification of perfectology. The enhancer of perfectology. The enhancers of perfectology. The enhancer of perfectology. The enhancement of perfectology. The enhancements of perfectology. The enhancement of perfectology. The magnifier of perfectology. The magnifiers of perfectology. The magnifier of perfectology. The magnification of perfectology. The magnifications of perfectology. The magnification of perfectology. The influencer of perfectology. The influencers of perfectology. The influencer of perfectology. The influence of perfectology. The influences of perfectology. The influence of perfectology. The emanator of perfectology. The emanators of perfectology. The emanator of perfectology. The emanation of perfectology. The emanations of perfectology. The emanation of perfectology. The converger of perfectology. The convergers of perfectology. The converger of perfectology. The convergence of perfectology. The convergences of perfectology. The convergence of perfectology. The aura of perfectology. The auras of perfectology. The aura of perfectology. The impression of perfectology. The impressions of perfectology. The impression of perfectology. The intelligence of perfectology. The intelligences of perfectology. The intelligence of perfectology. The sophistication of perfectology. The sophistications of perfectology. The sophistication of perfectology. The genius of perfectology. The geniuses of perfectology. The genius of perfectology. The polymath of perfectology. The polymaths of perfectology. The polymath of perfectology. The psychic of perfectology. The psychics of perfectology. The psychic of perfectology. The knowledge of perfectology. The knowledges of perfectology. The knowledge of perfectology. The understanding of perfectology. The understandings of perfectology. The understanding of perfectology. The wisdom of perfectology. The wisdoms of perfectology. The wisdom of perfectology. The secret of perfectology. The secrets of perfectology. The secret of perfectology. The mystery of perfectology. The mysteries of perfectology. The mystery of perfectology. The revelation of perfectology. The revelations of perfectology. The revelation of perfectology. The tactic of perfectology. The tactics of perfectology. The tactic of perfectology. The strategy of perfectology. The strategies of perfectology. The strategy of perfectology. The strength of perfectology. The strengths of perfectology. The strength of perfectology. The might of perfectology. The mights of perfectology. The might of perfectology. The power of perfectology. The powers of perfectology. The power of perfectology. The authority of perfectology. The authorities of perfectology. The authority of perfectology. The dominion of perfectology. The dominions of perfectology. The dominion of perfectology. The rhythm of perfectology. The rhythms of perfectology. The rhythm of perfectology. The melody of perfectology. The melodies of perfectology. The melody of perfectology. The music of perfectology. The musics of perfectology. The music of perfectology. The lyric of perfectology. The lyrics of perfectology. The lyric of perfectology. The song of perfectology. The songs of perfectology. The song of perfectology. The dance of perfectology. The dances of perfectology. The dance of perfectology. The spirit of perfectology. The spirits of perfectology. The spirit of perfectology. The soul of perfectology. The souls of perfectology. The soul of perfectology. The body of perfectology. The bodies of perfectology. The body of perfectology. The mark of perfectology. The marks of perfectology. The mark of perfectology. The promise of perfectology. The promises of perfectology. The promise of perfectology. The visionary of perfectology. The visionaries of perfectology. The visionary of perfectology. The vision of perfectology. The visions of perfectology. The vision of perfectology. The picture of perfectology. The pictures of perfectology. The picture of perfectology. The sound of perfectology. The sounds of perfectology. The sound of perfectology. The dung of perfectology. The dungs of perfectology. The dung of perfectology. The language of perfectology. The languages of perfectology. The language of perfectology. The communication of perfectology. The communications of perfectology. The communication of perfectology. The people of perfectology. The peoples of perfectology. The people of perfectology. The society of perfectology. The societies of perfectology. The society of perfectology. The fortress of perfectology. The fortresses of perfectology. The fortress of perfectology. The government of perfectology. The governments of perfectology. The government of perfectology. The city of perfectology. The cities of perfectology. The city of perfectology. The nation of perfectology. The nations of perfectology. The nation of perfectology. The civilization of perfectology. The civilizations of perfectology. The civilization of perfectology. The world of perfectology. The worlds of perfectology. The world of perfectology.